Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Three Pillars of Zen, Teaching, Practice, and Enlightenment, by Roshi Philip Kapleau, narrated by Runnette. Forward. Tradition has it that it was in the 6th century A.D., with the journey of Bodhidharma from India to China, that Zen Buddhism first moved east. 600 years later, in the 12th century, it traveled east again, to Japan. Now that more than another 600 years have elapsed, is it to take a third giant stride eastward, this time to the west? No one knows. The current Western interest in Zen wears the guise of the fad it in part is, but the interest also runs deeper. Let me cite the impression Zen has made on 3 Western minds of some note, those of a psychologist, a philosopher, and a historian. The book C.G. Jung was reading on his deathbed was Charles Luke's Chan and Zen-teaching, first series, and he expressly asked his secretary to write to tell the author that he was enthusiastic when he read what Shu Yun said. He sometimes felt as if he himself could have said exactly this. It was just it. In philosophy, Martin Heidegger was quoted as saying, "If I understand Dr. Suzuki correctly, this is what I have been trying to say in all my writings." Lynn White is not the molder of modern thought that Jung and Heidegger have been, but he is a fine historian, and he predicts, "It may well be the publication of D.T. Suzuki's first Essays in Zen Buddhism in 1927 will seem, in future generations, as great an intellectual event as William of Moerbecke's Latin translations of Aristotle in the 13th century or Marsilio Ficino's of Plato in the 15th. Why should the West, dominated to the extent it currently is by scientific modes of thought, go to school to a perspective forged before the rise of modern science? Some think the answer lies in the extent to which Buddhist cosmology anticipated what contemporary science has empirically discovered. The parallels are impressive. Astronomical time and space, which irrevocably smashed the West's previous worldview, slip into the folds of Buddhist cosmology without a ripple. If we turn from macrocosm to microcosm, from the infinite to the infinitesimal, we find the same uncanny prescience. While the Greeks were positing atoms that were eternal because not composite, atomos, indivisible, that which cannot be cut, Buddhists were teaching that everything corporeal is impermanent, anicca, because constituted of dharmas as minuscule in duration as they are in space, remarkably like the fleeting blips that particles register on the scientists' oscilloscopes. To return for a moment to the macrocosm, it is not just the dimensions of the scientific cosmology that Buddhism previsioned, but its form as well. We've become familiar with the debate between George Gamoff's Big Bang and Fred Hoyle's steady-state cosmogonies, the first arguing that the universe is the continuing consequence of the explosion of a single primeval atom, the second that the universe has always been in the state in which we know it, fresh hydrogen being continuously created to replace that which is being emptied out through the stars' recession once they exceed the speed of light. The latest word from Mount Palomar is that both these theories appear to be wrong. The red shifts on the spectrographic reports from distant galaxies suggest they are slowing down. The hypothesis this evokes is that after expanding for a while, the universe contracts, only to repeat the cycle indefinitely. As the Harvard astronomer Harlow Shapley puts the matter, instead of the Big Bang or the steady-state theories, we have the Bang, Bang, Bang theory. Very interesting, says the Buddhist, this being what his cosmology has taught him all along. The West may find such instances of Buddhism's scientific prescience striking, but this cannot account for Buddhism's appeal. For one thing, the West cannot feel that in science it has anything to learn from Buddhism. The most it can do in this sphere is give the Buddhists good marks for some precocious hunches. But there is the further fact that it is not Buddhism in general that is intriguing the West so much as the specific school of Buddhism that is Zen. We understand the specific attraction of Zen Buddhism when we realize the extent to which the contemporary West is animated by prophetic faith, the sense of the holiness of the ought, the pull of the way things could be and should be, but as yet are not. Such faith has obvious virtues, but unless it is balanced by a companion sense of the holiness of the is, it becomes top-heavy. If one's eyes are always on tomorrows, todays slip by unperceived. To a West, which in its concern to refashion heaven and earth is in danger of letting the presentness of life, the only life we really have, slip through its fingers, Zen comes as a reminder that if we do not learn to perceive the mystery and beauty of our present life, our present hour, we shall not perceive the worth of any life, of any hour. There is the further fact that with the collapse of metaphysics, natural theology, and objective revelation, the West is facing, for the first time as a civilization, the problem of living without objectively convincing absolutes. In a word, without dogmas. As Christ walked on the waters, so is the contemporary Westerner having to walk on the sea of nothingness, buoyant in the absence of demonstrably certain supports. Facing this precarious assignment, the Westerner hears of men across the sea who have for centuries taken up their abode in the void, come to feel at home in it, and to find joy within it. How can this be? The West does not understand, but the nothingness of which it hears from across the sea sounds like something it may have to come to terms with. Zen tells us that the is holy, and the void is home. But such affirmations are not Zen. Rather, Zen is a method for attaining to the direct experience of the truth of these affirmations. This brings us to the present book, for I know of no other that gives the audience so full an understanding of what this method is. For one thing, it presents for the first time in English Yasutani Roshi's introductory lectures on Zen training, lectures which have deservedly won the highest praise in Japan as being, in the words of Ruth Fuller Sasaki, the director of the first Zen Institute of America in Japan, the best introduction to Zen Buddhism yet written. But the book contains another prize that is even more striking. Up to now, it has been all but impossible for those who have not themselves undergone Zen training to get much of an inkling of what transpires in one crucial phase of the process, namely Dokusan, the series of solemn, private interviews in which the Roshi guides the student's meditation toward its goal of enlightenment. For the substance of these interviews has been considered personal and not to be divulged. Now a Roshi, convinced that our new age occasions new procedures, has permitted a series of these interviews to be reproduced. Such material has never appeared even in Japanese. For it to appear in English, in this book, is a major breakthrough. No one but Philip Kapleau could have written this book. He knows Zen from 13 years of ardent training in Japan, 3 of these years in both Soto and Rinzai monasteries. He knows the Japanese who have collaborated to render his translations of little-known material impeccable. He knows the Japanese language well enough himself to have served as interpreter for his Roshi's interviews with Western students. He has the skill of years of training as a court reporter to have recorded these interviews rapidly in shorthand as soon as they were over. And he has a literary style that is lucid and graceful. This assemblage of talents is unique. It has produced a remarkable book that is certain to assume a permanent place in the library of Zen literature in Western languages. Houston Smith, Professor of Philosophy, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Editor's Preface. Briefly stated, Zen is a religious practice with a unique method of body-mind training whose aim is awakening, that is, self-realization. In this volume, I have tried to convey the religious character and spirit of Zen, yes, its rituals and devotions, its appeal to the heart no less than to the mind. For as a Buddhist way of liberation, Zen is most assuredly a religion. Grounded in the highest teachings of the Buddha, it was brought from India to China, where the methods and practices which are characteristically Zen's were evolved, and then, through the centuries, further elaborated in Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Zen Buddhism is thus the consummation of the spiritual experiences of a number of Asian civilizations. In Japan today, this tradition is still very much alive. In Zen temples, monasteries, and private homes, men and women from every walk of life can be found actively engaged in Zazen, the principal discipline of Zen. At its profoundest level, Zen, like every other great religion, transcends its own teachings and practices. Yet at the same time, there is no Zen apart from these practices. Attempts in the West to isolate Zen in a vacuum of the intellect, cut off from the very disciplines which are its raison d'etre, have nourished in places a pseudo-Zen that is little more than a mind-tickling diversion. The best way to correct this distortion, it seemed to me, was to compile a book setting forth the authentic doctrines and practices of Zen from the mouths of the masters themselves, for who knows these methods better than they, as well as to explain the practices so that they come alive in the minds and bodies of men and women of today. This I have done chiefly through a contemporary Soto master, Yasutani Roshi, a 14th-century Rinzai master, Basui Zenji, and the Enlightenment stories of Japanese and American followers of Zen. Yasutani Roshi's introductory lectures on Zen practice, his lecture, Teisho, on the koan Mu, and his private instructions, Dokusan, to 10 of his Western students, form a unity which embraces the whole structure of Zen training in its traditional sequence. One lacking access to a bona fide Zen teacher, yet wishing to train in Zen, will find this material to be nothing less than a manual for self-instruction. Both the Soto and Rinzai disciplines are presented here, for the first time in a European language, we believe, as one integral body of Zen teaching. And this is not academically, but as a living experience. The aims and methods of Shikantaza, the heart of Soto meditative discipline, as well as those of Koan Zazen, the mainstay of the Rinzai sect, are authoritatively expounded by Yasutani Roshi, who utilizes both in his own system of teaching. In the introductions, I have presented background and supplementary material which I felt would aid the listener to grasp the substance of each section, but I have resisted the temptation to analyze or interpret the Master's teachings. This would only have encouraged listeners to reinterpret my interpretations, and willy-nilly they would find themselves sucked into the quicksands of speculation and ego-aggrandizement, from which, one day, if they would seriously practice Zen, they would painfully have to extricate themselves. For precisely this reason, idea-mongering has always been discouraged by the Zen masters. This book owes much to many people. First and foremost, it owes an enormous debt to Zen master Yasutani, whose teachings encompass more than half of it, and who has graciously allowed them to be made available here to a wider public. My collaborators and I, all his disciples, are deeply grateful for his sagacious counsel and magnanimity of spirit, which inspired us throughout. My debt of gratitude to Kyozo Yamada Roshi, the Dharma heir of Yasutani Roshi, cannot be put into words. Friend and teacher, he was a tower of strength to lean on. Were it not for his wise advice and generous assistance, my overall task would have been immeasurably more difficult, if not impossible. We collaborated on the translations of Basui's Dharma talk on One Mind and his letters, portions of the Iwasaki letters, the 10 ox-herding verses, the quotations from Dogen and other ancient masters, and the extract from Dogen's Shobogenzo. Akira Kubota, my second collaborator, was one of Yasutani Roshi's foremost disciples, having trained under him for some 15 years. Together we translated the lecture on the Koan Mu, parts of the Iwasaki letters, and the 4th and 6th accounts in the section on enlightenment experiences. I acknowledge my huge debt to him for his conscientious labors. My special thanks are due to Dr. Carmen Blacker of Cambridge University. Her on-the-spot translations of many of Yasutani Roshi's lectures on Zen practice were incorporated by me into the translations which appear in this book. Further, I have taken the liberty of adopting, without alteration, several paragraphs from her own translation of sections of this same material, which was published in the British Buddhist magazine The Middle Way, since her expression was so felicitous that I could hardly hope to have improved upon it. I am exceedingly grateful to Dr. Houston Smith, professor of philosophy at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and author of The Religions of Man, for his invaluable advice and encouragement in an early stage of the manuscript, and for his foreword. Brigitte Dorchy, a Dharma friend, was exceedingly helpful. Her thoughtful study of the entire manuscript produced many valuable suggestions which have improved the book. My debt to my wife, Delancey, is no small one. At all stages of this material, she has encouraged and worked with me. Indeed, for several years, these labors constituted her major practice of Zazen. In our translations, we have striven to avoid the evils of either a free, imaginative rendering on the one hand, or an exactly literal presentation on the other. Had we yielded to the first temptation, we might have achieved a stylistic elegance now lacking, but only at the expense of that forthright vigor and calculated repetition which is a characteristic feature of Zen teaching. On the other hand, had we slavishly adhered to the letter of the texts, we inevitably would have done violence to their spirit and thus obscured their deep inner meaning. Our translations are interpretive in the sense that all translation involves the constant choice of one of several alternative expressions, which the translator believes may convey the meaning of the original. Whether a translator's choices are apposite depends, in the ordinary translation, on his linguistic skill and his familiarity with his subject. Zen texts, however, fall into a special category. Since they are invariably terse and pithy, and the ideograms in which they are written susceptible to a variety of interpretations, one key character often conveying a whole spectrum of ideas, to select the shade of meaning appropriate to a particular context demands from a translator more than a philological acuity or an extensive academic knowledge of Zen. In our view, it requires nothing less than Zen training and the experience of enlightenment, lacking which the translator is almost certain to distort the clarity and emasculate the vigor of the original. It may not be out of place, therefore, to point out that every one of the translators has trained in Zen for a considerable time under one or more recognized masters and opened his mind's eye in some measure. Even at the risk of some inconsistency, I have dispensed with as much disruptive emphasis as seemed reasonable. In the body of the book, I have followed the Japanese custom of pronouncing the names of the Chinese Zen masters and other Chinese terms according to their Japanese pronunciation, just as we speak of Zen rather than Chan Buddhism. Chinese scholars who find this irritating are asked to bear in mind that Zen Buddhism has been in Japan almost 1,000 years, and hence is a legitimate part of Japanese life and culture. It could scarcely have survived so long or made such a strong impact on the Japanese had they not abandoned the foreign and, for them, cumbersome Chinese pronunciation. In conveying the names of the ancient Japanese masters, I have adhered to the traditional Japanese custom of listing the chief Buddhist name first. In the case of modern Japanese, however, whether masters or lay practitioners, I have followed the Western style, which of course is just the reverse, since this is the way they themselves write their names in English. When a title comes immediately after a name, such as Yasutani Roshi or Dogen Zenji, for the sake of euphony, the name and the title have been written according to traditional Japanese style, as here indicated. While the organization of the book follows the natural pattern of teaching, practice, and enlightenment, each section is complete in itself and can be absorbed at random according to the listener's taste. Philip Kapleau, Kamakura, December 8, 1964. Part 1. Teaching and Practice. Chapter 1. Yasutani Roshi's Introductory Lectures on Zen Training. Editor's Introduction. Westerners eager to practice Zen, yet lacking access to a qualified master, have always faced an imposing handicap: the dearth of written information on what Zazen is and how to begin to carry it on. Nor is this lack confined to English and other European languages. In the writings of the Chinese and Japanese Zen masters, which have come down to us, there is little on the theory of Zazen or on the relation of the practice of Zazen to enlightenment. Neither is there much detailed information on such elementary matters as sitting postures, the regulation of the breath, concentration of the mind, and the incidence of visions and sensations of an illusory nature. There is nothing strange in this. Sitting in Zazen or meditation has been so accepted as the approved path to spiritual emancipation throughout Asia that no Zen Buddhist had first to be convinced that through it one could develop one's powers of concentration, achieve unification and tranquility of mind, and eventually, if one's aspiration was pure and strong enough, come to self-realization. An aspirant, therefore, was simply given a few oral instructions on how to fold the legs, how to regulate the breath, and how to concentrate the mind. Through the painful process of trial and error and periodic encounters, Dokusan, with one's teacher, one eventually learned in a thoroughly experiential way not only proper sitting and breathing, but also the inner meaning and purpose of Zazen. But since modern people, as Yasutani Roshi points out, lack the faith and burning zeal of their predecessors in Zen, they need a map their mind can trust, charting their entire spiritual journey before they can move ahead with confidence. For these reasons, Narrator Roshi, Yasutani Roshi's own master, devised a series of introductory lectures on Zen practice some years ago, and it is this material which forms the basis of these lectures by Yasutani Roshi. This present translation is a combination of a number of such lectures which Yasutani Roshi has given, without notes, to beginners over the past several years. No new student may receive Dokusan until he or she has heard them all. These talks are more than a compendium of instructions on the formal aspects of Zazen, that is, sitting, breathing, and concentration. They are an authoritative exposition of the 5 levels of Zen, of the aims and essentials of Zazen, and of the all-important relation of Zazen to enlightenment, Satori. With them as map and compass, earnest seekers need not grope along hazardous bypaths of the occult, the psychic, or the superstitious, which waste time and often prove harmful, but can proceed directly along a carefully charted course, secure in the knowledge of their ultimate goal. No account of the history and development of Zen, no interpretations of Zen from the viewpoint of philosophy or psychology, and no evaluations of the influence of Zen on archery, judo, haiku, poetry, or any other of the Japanese arts will be found here. Valuable as these studies can be, they have no legitimate place in Zen training, and would only burden aspirants' minds with ideas that would confuse them as to their aims and drain them of the incentive to practice. For this reason, such studies are deliberately omitted by Yasutani Roshi. Yasutani Roshi's emphasis on the religious aspects of Zen Buddhism, that is, on faith as a prerequisite to enlightenment, may come as a surprise to Western audiences accustomed to intellectual images of Zen by scholars devoid of Zen insight. This derives, for the most part, from the teachings of Dogen Zenji, one of the imposing religious personalities of Japanese history, who brought the doctrines of the Soto sect of Zen Buddhism from China to Japan. Without even a sketchy knowledge of the circumstances of Dogen's life that led him to become a Zen monk and to journey to China, where he attained the Great Way, one would find it difficult to understand the Soto Zen doctrine which forms the core of Yasutani Roshi's own teachings. Born of an aristocratic family, Dogen, even as a child, gave evidence of his brilliant mind. It is related that at 4 he was reading Chinese poetry, and at 9, a Chinese translation of a treatise on the Abhidharma. The sorrow he felt at his parents' deaths, his father when he was only 3, and his mother when he was 8, undoubtedly impressed upon his sensitive mind the impermanence of life, and motivated him to become a monk. With his initiation into the Buddhist monkhood at an early age, he commenced his novitiate at Mount Hiei, the center of scholastic Buddhism in medieval Japan, and for the next several years studied the Tendai doctrines of Buddhism. By his 15th year, one burning question became the core around which his spiritual strivings revolved. If, as the sutras say, our essential nature is Bodhi, perfection, why did all the Buddhas have to strive for enlightenment and perfection? His dissatisfaction with the answers he received at Mount Hiei led him eventually to Eisai Zenji, who had brought the teachings of the Rinzai sect of Zen Buddhism from China to Japan. Eisai's reply to Dogen's question was, "No Buddha is conscious of its existence, that is, of this essential nature, while cats and oxen, that is, the grossly deluded, are aware of it." In other words, Buddhas, precisely because they are Buddhas, no longer think of having or not having a perfect nature. Only the deluded think in such terms. At these words, Dogen had an inner realization which resolved his deep-seated doubt. In all likelihood, this exchange took place in a formal encounter, Dokusan, between Eisai and Dogen. It must be borne in mind that this problem had perplexed Dogen for some time, giving him no rest, and that all he needed was Eisai's words to trigger his mind into a state of enlightenment. Dogen therefore commenced what was to be a brief discipleship under Eisai, whose death took place within the year, and who was succeeded by his eldest disciple, Myozen. During the 8 years Dogen spent with Myozen, he passed a considerable number of koans, and finally received Inka. Despite this accomplishment, Dogen still felt spiritually unfulfilled, and this disquiet moved him to undertake the then hazardous journey to China in search of complete peace of mind. He stayed at all the well-known monasteries, practicing under many masters, but his longing for total liberation was unsatisfied. Eventually, at the famous Tien Tung monastery, which had just acquired a new master, he achieved full awakening, that is, the liberation of body and mind, through these words uttered by his master, Ju Qing: "You must let fall body and mind." These words are said to have been uttered by Ju Qing at the commencement of the formal Zazen period, in the early morning, as he was making his round of inspection. Spying one of the monks dozing, the master reprimanded him for his half-hearted effort. Then, addressing all the monks, he continued, "You must exert yourselves with all your might, even at the risk of your lives. To realize perfect enlightenment, you must let fall, that is, become empty of all conceptions of body and mind." As Dogen heard this last phrase, his mind's eye suddenly expanded in a flood of light and understanding. Later, Dogen appeared at Ju Qing's room, lit a stick of incense, a ceremonial gesture usually reserved for noteworthy occasions, and prostrated himself before his master in the customary fashion. "Why are you lighting a stick of incense?" asked Ju Qing. Needless to say, Ju Qing, who was a first-rate master, and who had received Dogen many times in Dokusan, and therefore knew the state of his mind, could perceive at once from Dogen's walk, his prostrations, and the comprehending look in his eyes, that he had had a great enlightenment. But Ju Qing undoubtedly wanted to find out what response this innocent-sounding question would provoke, so as to fix the scope of Dogen's satori. "I have experienced the dropping off of body and mind," replied Dogen. Ju Qing exclaimed, "You have dropped body and mind. Body and mind have indeed dropped." But Dogen remonstrated, "Don't give me your sanction so readily." "I am not sanctioning you so readily." Reversing their roles, Dogen demanded, "Show me that you are not readily sanctioning me." And Ju Qing repeated, "This is body and mind dropped," demonstrating. whereas Dogen prostrated himself again before his master as a gesture of respect and gratitude. That's dropped, added.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?